Okay, trying to stream on YouTube again. Normally, I just stream on TikTok because it's a lot better, basically. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't let you like invite people on to debate, which is really sad. Um, but maybe we can debate people in the chat, in the comments. Um, Steve is joining us today, the founder of the movement. He can't join on the stream, but he can maybe join us in the comments. Yeah, YouTube really needs to change that system. Okay, Steve is in the chat. That's great. It's showing one viewer now for me. So, yeah, that's accurate. And I can see the chat. That's great. I think the viewer count is a bit unreliable on YouTube as well. It can show one viewer when you've actually got 10. It doesn't update very well. So it's going to be, it makes it tricky. But yes, let's introduce extinct. Amazingly, YouTube is translating everything you're saying into Portuguese. So your comments are coming out in Portuguese. But okay. Right, let's begin with introducing extinctionism. Extinctionism is it's the pro-extinction movement is the movement working to end and prevent all suffering. It is the movement working without discrimination for all life, to prevent all life and all of the suffering that comes with it. The idea that life is a blessing is wrong. It's a myth, basically. Life is actually a curse. And the reason for that is that we're not in any kind of heaven, okay? We're actually in what is effectively hell. So every new life coming into hell is a bad thing. Now, is it really hell? Is it really that bad? Well, yes, definitely. For the lucky ones at the very top, most people are actually the privileged. They don't realize it, but they are. And they are the top 1% or even less, really. The thing is that over 99.9% of life on this planet gets born into extreme, terrible conditions. So the vast majority of the population on Earth are wild animals, and they're born into the worst conditions. Even farmed animals have better conditions than wild animals. Even farmed animals get euthanasia, shelter, security of food, medicine, euthanasia. Wild animals don't get anything, okay? They have literally zero conditions, zero help, and the highest amount of danger and suffering. So that is actually the vast majority of the experience on this planet. Over 99.9% of life born on Earth will be born as a wild animal or an insect, basically an animal or a creature in the wild with the worst conditions. Now, the vast majority of them die a painful death during childhood. So there's no balance, there's no kind of good life that, is unfortunately ended by a cruel death or anything. It's just cruelty, it's extreme suffering, and it's only by luck and chance that we ourselves weren't born into that. We could just as easily be a wild animal suffering. So for the vast majority of life, it is a curse. It's not a blessing. The vast majority of life, are basically eaten alive as children. That is the most common experience for life on this planet, is to be born as a baby. You're starving, you're freezing to death in nature, and you get eaten alive. It's not something you would want to experience. It's not something anyone would want to experience. And yet everyone seems happy to condemn others to this terrible experience, the worst experience, basically. So we live in a system of exploitation, of taking advantage of others and allowing and condemning others to suffer for our benefit. So it's a fundamentally evil society that we live in. a fundamentally evil system. You can't say that it's a good system. You can't say that it's an acceptable system, because the vast majority of life born here is being tortured to death as babies. So there's nothing acceptable about that. Only the lucky ones think it's acceptable, the privileged. So effectively, everyone who is against extinction is against the victims. They're against those who are being tortured by life. They are the top 1%. Even people that say, "Oh, I had extreme depression. I beat cancer, and now I'm happy. So suffering is not that bad." They are the lucky ones. Anyone who has the privilege to say that suffering isn't that bad, and that my life is great, so therefore everyone can have a great life, you are the oppressor. You are the top 1%. Only the lucky ones benefit from being forced to exist, but the vast majority are not benefiting. So even among humans, most of them are suffering. They're struggling to survive. They've got depression. They're working jobs that they hate. They're miserable. They're going to get diseases. They're going to get accidents. They can end up with being hit by a car and ending up with brain damage, chronic pain, all of these terrible things. And who do we look up to? Who do we idolize? Who do we focus our attention on? It's celebrities, it's actors, it's sports stars. We don't pay attention to the victims. We just ignore them, condemn them, and forget about them. It's an ugly system. It's a cruel system. And it is fundamentally a system that says that it is acceptable to condemn others to suffer, to force them to exist and to experience bad lives, terrible lives, extremely bad lives, and the worst lives. Again, for the vast majority of life, they are born into the worst life possible, which is to be an animal in nature with no conditions, no safety, just extreme suffering and a cruel death, where again the majority are eaten alive by animals. We're talking about babies here having their eyes torn out of their heads while they're still trying to blink. They're crying, and their crying is only ended by their tear ducts being eaten. Okay? It's an extremely terrible experience. It's a horrific experience. And unless you're, in favor of extinction and abolishing this forced existence and extreme suffering, then you're saying that it's fine. You're saying that these babies can be tortured to death. So, if that's your position, that it's fine to condemn babies to be tortured to death, then you are evil. Something is seriously wrong with you. And the amount of mental gymnastics that you need to try and think that you're not a terrible person is insane. Okay, you can't be a good person while saying it's acceptable to condemn other life to extreme suffering and the risk of extreme suffering. The victims don't deserve it, and there will be victims. There are victims. Would you want to be born as a wild animal in nature that gets eaten alive after starving and freezing to death and being chased by vicious animals who eventually catch you, and several of them eat you alive at the same time? You wouldn't want that to happen to you. You wouldn't want that to happen to your mother or to anyone you know. Hopefully, you wouldn't want anyone to experience that. But just because that's the system of nature and that's the default, that's the status quo, doesn't make it okay. It's our nature to reproduce, but that doesn't make it okay. It's our nature to cause others suffering, to exploit others, and depend on suffering. You just have to look at farmed animals. We have a massive population of animals that we're torturing just so that we can exploit them. They are slaves. There is genuinely no other way to call it. To think of it. So, in the same way that farmed animals are slaves, every life that is born to suffer and to die a cruel death, they are slaves, essentially. And if you're saying that, I know that they're going to have such a bad life that they would definitely be better off being safe from being forced into it and forced into torture. If you're, if you know that they would be better off, but you're happy to condemn them to it, for what, by the way? Um, your pleasure, your benefit, it's inherently evil. And people are trying to warp this extreme evil into something justifiable, acceptable somehow. So you have literal babies being tortured to death, and people will say, but what about, my joy? What about my pleasure? So it's an incredibly disgusting system that we live in, and it's an incredibly disgusting and cruel status quo, which everyone is existing in and not fighting against. The thing is, unless you fight against this system, then you're allowing it, you're supporting it. Antinatalists, for example, they think they're somehow fighting the system by not bringing another child into it. But no, the system is going to continue on just fine, okay? And antinatalism is like a drop in the ocean anyway. And it's just a completely backwards and not thought out ideology. Whereas extinctionism, and specifically the pro extinction movement, has thought it all out. We have thought everything out. We have a plan. We are engaging in that plan. The plan is being carried out. We are actively working towards total extinction and no more victims and no more extreme suffering. Now, most people kind of have a shock reaction to that of, oh, that's bad, that's bad. Extinction can't be a good thing. But actually, it's a great thing for the vast majority of life, because the vast majority of life have a bad life, a terrible life, an extremely bad life, and all the way down to the worst lives. And as I like to mention to people, most people ignore the worst lives, right? Um, in fact, they'll say to me, James, what? But are you really saying that I should have to, stop living just because I've stubbed my toe? But that's not what we're talking about, and that's what everyone says for some reason. But that's not what we're talking about. That's not the reality. That's a straw man. It's a fantasy version of reality, and it's completely detached from the real world. In the real world, most life born here gets tortured to death as a baby. Okay? It's not acceptable. There's no acceptable trade-off. There's nothing that comes from this which justifies it. The vast majority of life born here is getting tortured. They're suffering extreme suffering. And the thing is, the dead don't write books. And that's feeds that, that grossly feeds into this extreme naivete and ignorance of the victims and their suffering, because the dead don't write books. Depressed people that do self-harm, they might write a note at the end to say goodbye, but you can't question them on how terrible it was. Instead, you'll hear gross selfish people who are at the top of the ladder because they've abused their way to get there. They've got this mentality of just ignore, don't care about anyone else, only care about yourself, and they glorify it. So that's who we hear from. We hear from, selfish people. We hear from immoral people, because they've got the mansions. They've, lied their way to the mansions. They've got. It's almost perceived as credibility. All these rich, selfish people. Okay, it's like, wow, they must be doing something right. But again, we don't look at the victims. We ignore them, um, and that's just wrong. The victims of this world essentially deserve the most help. They deserve our time. They deserve our resources. They deserve our attention and our dedication. The privileged and the lucky ones are not more important than the ones that aren't privileged, right? essentially, again, the status quo says, and most people, whether they realize it or not, have a mindset and a mentality of, the lucky ones, the minority of lucky ones in this world are more important, and they need to live and have fun, even if it means that the majority have a terrible life, and a life so extremely bad that you would definitely be better off not existing. Okay, a baby that gets tortured for their entire life to death would definitely be better off not being forced into that situation. There's no upside for them. There's no positive side to it. There's no like life and meaning that they can generate from their suffering. They just get tortured and die. You can't justify it, right? People will constantly try to justify and warp and twist the reality, but there is no reality where you can say it's acceptable for children to be tortured to death, or for anyone to be tortured to death. I would say that it's unacceptable for anyone to have a bad life, or for there to be a risk of anyone having a bad life, including animals. But again, animals have the worst lives. Even if your cat or your dog has a good life, in your opinion, right? You still definitely wouldn't want to be them. And you do have the intelligence to understand that it's not something you would want. Okay? You definitely wouldn't want to be a dog. You definitely wouldn't want to be an animal. They are so vulnerable. They are so incapable of taking care of themselves. And they are so fragile. They are so unintelligent because they're animals. It's a horrific experience. It's one of terror. It's one of fear. It's one of confusion. Right? They have extremely low intelligence. They have to rely on instincts and primal motivations. Right? So even a happy house cat will still be terrified all of the time, right? They rely on extreme levels of fear and paranoia almost. It's a horrible existence for them because they are so vulnerable. They are glass cannons. Uh, Anyone can just catch them and torture them to death, eat them alive, do horrible things to them. And they know this, right? Or at least they're instinctively aware of it. So, animals have terrible lives, and yet they are the majority of the population on this planet and have the least moral consideration. Who does get moral consideration on this planet? It's kind of an out of sight, out of mind system. Um, if someone in front of you is asking for help, yeah, you maybe think, yeah, I'll help them, right? And I'd be a bad person if I didn't. But it's very much an out of sight, out of mind system of immorality and moral escapism almost. Because actually, you don't need to wait for someone to be in front of you in order to help them. Okay, that's it. That's just avoidance of moral obligation, basically. Um, and yet, really, we live in such a terrible world, such a cruel world, and yet, despite that, and despite how desperately all of these life forms need all different types of help, although again, prevention of life is definitely the most effective way to prevent extreme suffering. Um, Despite all of this obligation and all of this terrible stuff happening, people will still selfishly focus on themselves and essentially ignore or deny or escape or reject moral obligation. Okay? So that's why people feel perfectly happy to sit around and watch Netflix and, it's just my life. I'm only responsible for my life. That's my only responsibility. But no, the thing is that you actually can help others, and they need it. They need the help far more than you need to watch Netflix. Okay, so if you're going to suffer because you're not watching Netflix, um, that suffering is nothing compared to those that you can help and who need help. And the ultimate help and the ultimate problem is forced existence and terrible lives and extreme suffering, unacceptable lives. There is nothing worse. And I challenge everyone to try and, suggest something worse than a bad life. Again, encapsulating all types of bad lives, right? From ones that are just survival and it was pretty shit anyway, to the very worst ones, right? Which again is the majority. I think it's very easy to say, people have it upside down, right? Actually, the majority of life is having the worst life. It's only the very lucky ones who are having even, anything close to a vaguely acceptable life or a good life. It's a small minority. It's definitely a small minority. I mean, I don't think you can say that, the mass populations of wild animals getting eaten alive as babies are having a good life. And why would they deserve less moral consideration? Again, they are just the same as us, but in a different body. They're sentient, right? Now we don't know exactly how sentient every different animal is, but they definitely have sentience, right? I mean, otherwise, what? You're going to say that torturing cats and dogs is okay? Well, it's obviously not. They do suffer, and they have more than enough consciousness, more than enough sentience for it to be extreme suffering and to feel absolute agony and terrors beyond, imagination. So, there's no argument that animals don't deserve moral consideration, that they're worth less somehow. Um, they are the biggest population on the planet. They suffer the worst. They have the worst conditions, no shelter, no safety, no medicine. They don't have any of the good stuff. And conversely, they have all of the bad stuff. So it's a system of extreme suffering and cruelty. Um, so yeah, that's what the pro-extinction movement is about. You can check out our website, proextinction.com. We are fighting for the majority of life. We are fighting to end cruel and forced existence, extreme suffering. Nobody deserves to suffer, whether you're a human or an animal. It's wrong, okay? And, even if you had 100 people running around and having fun and playing frisbee at the expense of one child being tortured to death. It's still absolutely unacceptable. Think of it as like a pleasure boat, okay? And there's 10 people having a great time on this boat, but one of them is being, tortured viciously, like horrifically, and the people just have to stop the boat and that's it. But they don't, right? They're like, no, we want to keep going. You're just going to have to be tortured to death. We're having too much fun on this pleasure boat. It's disgusting. It's wrong. It's evil. You don't need to have that fun. It's a privilege that you don't need and that you're essentially exploiting others for. It's a shallow, shallow privilege with shallow, fleeting pleasures, and there's really not much to it. And to say that it's acceptable to condemn anyone to suffer or children to be tortured to death, which is our current system, it's wrong. If you think it's acceptable to exploit others. And if you think it's acceptable to allow any life to be born and to suffer in a way that is irrefutable, that they'd be better off not being forced into that, then you are evil. You are on the side of oppression, immorality, disgusting selfishness, and yeah, like there is. I don't know how else to put it, but you are evil unless you think that we should protect the innocents. We should prevent them from being tortured. We should prioritize safety. Life deserves better. Life deserves better than to be forced, into existence, into what is effectively hell. You know, we sit in our ivory towers in our houses, on our computers, and we don't see any extreme suffering out the window, so we think it's fine. but we are in the top, 0.0001% bubble. Everyone else is having a terrible time. Everyone else is in hell. Again, we could be animals just as easily. So there's no reason to discriminate against animals. They are just another number, another victim, another sufferer, and they deserve equal moral consideration. Now, everyone deserves moral consideration, but the thing is, right, morality and doing the right thing, it is about prioritizing those who are suffering. Okay, there's no way to be a good person and to say that we should ignore suffering, allow suffering, and benefit from suffering of others. Okay, yeah, it's just extremely upside down. So, what is correct morality? Well, it's simple. It's saying that suffering is unacceptable, safety is paramount, and no one deserves to suffer, and no one deserves the risk of being made to suffer. Okay, so there is no moral system or good moral system or acceptable moral system where you are saying it's okay to condemn innocents to extreme suffering and torture so that we can benefit. I mean, it's an obviously immoral system that we have. So, there's no defending it, there's no excusing it, and it's completely upside down. If you want to be on the right side, if you want to be on the side of good, then you have to prioritize the sufferers. You have to prioritize the victims, not the privileged ones, right? If you take away the privilege of the lucky people, they don't lose anything. If you take away the continued existence of the privileged, and if you have to do that for total extinction, which you do, then essentially you're taking away their privilege, but that's not very important, and you're actually providing them safety as well. So non-existence is a massive benefit, really. It's ultimate safety, and that is absolutely more important than reckless endangerment, essentially, which is what we are doing. No life deserves to be born into chances and conditions that allow for a life of extreme torture and misery and a terrible life and a cruel death. No one deserves that. No one asks for that, right? So no one deserves to be forced into that situation. It's terrible. Only the very lucky ones benefit from being forced to exist. So being forced to exist and existence is the worst thing possible. It is the ultimate evil. It's kind of black and white in that sense. Um, you know, you have extreme suffering and you have the privileged. Obviously, those that are suffering are more important. They need the help urgently. They need to not suffer. They need to be protected from suffering. Whereas the privileged people at the top, they don't need their privilege. Okay, they just want it. That's all. But they don't actually need it. Now, for those that are being tortured and suffering, it's not that they want to not suffer. Okay, obviously they don't want to suffer, but they do need to not suffer. It is essential. It's necessary. It's something that they have to have. They have to have help, right? It's not something that it's not optional. Whereas, having privilege and living life and having fun, that's a privilege. It's something you want. It's something you don't need. Okay. Now, if you don't have that and you're in non-existence, then you're just simply safe. Okay. Yeah, you're not having loads of pleasure, but you don't need it, right? Nothing bad really happens if you don't have it. Whereas if you are suffering, yeah, something terrible is happening, and it should be stopped as soon as possible. Um, yeah, so I've been streaming for 30 minutes now on YouTube, and as I said at the start of the stream, it's not very good. YouTube is kind of rubbish for streaming, so I'm going to try TikTok again. Um, I'm going to talk to Steve, who is the founder of the movement, proextinction.com. So I might move on to TikTok in a few minutes. If not, Me and Steve might do a podcast or something. But yeah, when I'm on TikTok, I get way more viewers than this. And I can also invite people on to debate live. So if you want to follow me on TikTok, and I don't even like TikTok, but as a concept, but it is just better, then search me on TikTok. It's James space Idwan, IDOINE. Yeah, I should probably put some links out and stuff. But yeah, James space Idwan, IDOINE. Come and join me on TikTok. We do debates live with guests there because you can bring random people onto the stream. It's much better. This background is much more useful when we've actually got people joining and debating live. However, all of my debates on TikTok, I do post them onto my YouTube channel. So there's maybe 20 hours of debates now on TikTok on my YouTube channel, which you're watching now. So if you want to see them just on YouTube, you can watch them there. But it's much better than me just talking to the camera, which I'm doing now. So yeah, I'm probably going to switch on to TikTok.